Hey everyone, it is late at night and I am Norman. Tonight's video of Watch News is a little bit different than normal. Tonight we'll be discussing two thought-provoking articles that I've encountered on Robb Report. So let us begin. So every day I kind of cull through a list of different sites and just kind of see what's going on out there in the watch world. And after a while, there's a little bit of fatigue involved in that. I mean, there are so many articles of Rolex has a new release, AP has a new release, Richard Mille has a new release. And all the pieces are just kind of similar to their previous pieces with minor tweaks, or they just have the same aesthetic. Yeah. So scouring through for intriguing articles or articles that kind of stand out and are different from the other ones, it's always refreshing to see those. And lately one site kind of stands out for that, at least for these two articles, and that is Robb Report. And the article in question is a piece on what watch collectors get wrong. Sorry. What everyone in the watch world gets wrong. And I don't disagree with the author of this article. The author's right. However, I feel like sometimes there are things that we're right about that are just kind of splitting hairs. More on that later. So this article discusses two terms that everybody gets wrong. And the problem with arguments like this are people generally know what you're trying to communicate. I mean, that's the point of words, is communication. And if you successfully communicate, is it that big of a deal that you might be using an incorrect word? Like if I were to say, regardless of their popularity, I still love moon watches. Or if I said, irregardless of their popularity, I still love moon watches, you would know what I was trying to say with both of those sentences, even though I think irregardless is wrong in that case. But I got my point across. However, I can totally relate to the author because there are some things that people say that I have a hard time biting my tongue on. One of them is could care less. Every time I hear that phrase, I'm just dying inside a little bit. And I mean, in that particular case, you are literally saying the exact opposite of what you're trying to say. If someone could care less, then that means that they do care about something. The whole point of the phrase is to say that somebody doesn't care so much, it is impossible for them to care any less. But, irregardless, you've made your point. We all understand what you're trying to say. And if I remember right, I had read somewhere that incorrect usage of that phrase came about from somebody writing in an op-ed letter or something to a newspaper, which seems a little bit suspect to me. I'm not sure how a phrase like that comes about from one single letter. I could be totally wrong, but I feel like if you had an author that frequently used it over and over again, that would make sense if it got picked up by the general populace, more so than one single individual letter, but irregardless. It reminds me of Alice in Wonderland. At least Disney's animated version. I don't recall if it was in the original book, but there's an interaction at the Mad Tea Party where the Mad Hatter asks Alice if she wants more tea. To which she replies, I haven't had any tea. How could I possibly have more? And the March Hare interrupts and says, I believe you mean you can't very well take less. You can always take more than nothing. Yeah, that's a pretty good comparison of the could care less thing. But I get it. Maybe this author is very black and white. I know people like that. And if you say something incorrectly, they must correct it. It's just in their genetics. So the author's discussing the difference between precision and accuracy. And this is a very interesting topic for an article because when I first started reading it, I was thinking to myself, I don't know if I actually know the difference between accuracy and precision. So he cites a book by Alexis McCrossan, who wrote a book called Marking Modern Times. And she writes, "It's important for our understanding of 19th century clock time to distinguish between precision and accuracy. A precise clock computes and records the passage of time consistently. A clock set to the wrong time can still be precise if it measures out each second, minute, and hour correctly. An accurate clock, however, is one that is set to the correct time." And when we think about it, that makes sense. Various brands will use the term precision in describing movements and whatnot. However, for the most part, we kind of use these terms interchangeably. So someone will describe their watch as being accurate, when they actually mean precise. But this goes back to the whole point that they got their message across. You know what they're trying to say. So in this regard, the author's frustration that the various watchmakers and other people that he discussed this with basically just kind of brushed it off and said it was no big deal. And I kind of agree, it is kind of splitting hairs. As long as we all understand what we're trying to say to each other, we aren't being terribly precise. But when we say accurate, we do know what we mean. However, this was a very thought-provoking article, so bravo on that point. It was definitely unique amid all of the review articles and new release articles that were coming through. The second article that I encountered on Robb Report was a piece entitled "How Tom Brady Wrecked the Cartier Crash." And this was an interesting article. So the author, and by the way, it's the same author that did the precision and accuracy article, but he goes on to point out the failure that is the Cartier crash and Tom Brady's not so impressive fashion sense. The author gives us a great brief history of Cartier itself and explains the origins of the crash. So in the 60s, apparently, Cartier wasn't doing so hot with all the turmoil going on. Apparently, luxury jewelry and watches were not so in vogue. And the crash came about via a request from British actor Stuart Granger, who wanted a watch that was unlike anything else. So they came up with the crash, and yeah, Granger didn't want it. It was too weird. He decided to go for something more classic. And I guess only a handful of these watches were made and were sold for the equivalent at that time of about $8,000. And they were just kind of a big flop. And the author rightly points out that a jock with questionable fashion sense wearing a Cartier crash is completely different than if he was wearing a Cartier tank, because the crash is a statement piece, and the tank is simply a classy dress watch. But I have to take some issue with this article. Number one, because I personally like the crash. And I think it's cool that Cartier came up with a piece like this. I mean, they're great at their classy, dressy, tank-style watches, but at the same time, I feel like it's good when brands step out of the box and do completely different things and really take a risk on those ideas. And I just think the crash actually embodies the Cartier aesthetic, along with an avant-garde surrealist twist on it. And two, just because they're popular isn't a reason for us to hate them. I mean, there are plenty of watches that are absolutely ubiquitous. The Moon watch, and I still like the aesthetic of Moon watches. They just look brilliant, no matter how many people are wearing them. And thirdly, as the author himself describes it, the high school politics of jocks versus fashionistas. Yeah, do we have to go back to high school? I mean, we're adults. If people who play sports for a living decide to wear whatever watches they wear, that's their business. Who are we to judge? Maybe Tom Brady actually likes the Cartier crash. I like weird, ugly watches that other people hate, but that's fine because I like them. And if our beef with the Cartier crash is that everybody's wearing it and everybody thinks it's cool, and fashiony people shouldn't be like that, I've done a video that discussed the fashion series that Hodinkee, I think it was, did, where their head of fashion went through Paris interviewing fashion people and their watches. There were so many Rolexes in that video. So many Cartier tanks, so many watches that everybody wears. And these fashion people are wearing them, and they're just pedestrian luxury watches. So I don't know about that point either. I do appreciate the history on the crash and Cartier themselves, and bringing to our attention some of the articles that Sports Illustrated has written critiquing Tom Brady's fashion. And not being a huge Tom Brady fan, I have to giggle a little bit when I read those articles. Just a little bit. But I actually like the crash. And I like Cartier a lot. So I wish them nothing but the best, and I'm glad that the crash is doing well for the first time ever. So those are two thought-provoking, controversial articles that have come out of Robb Report. I'll have to keep my eye on this publication because these are some unique write-ups that you don't normally see in Watch News feeds. Thanks for watching.